And we're back, coming back at you with another book review. It's your boy, SCifi. This time we're doing Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, a certifiable classic, although I personally prefer to call it Oh yeah. Brave New World is a dystopian future novel originally released in 1930. Now, it might be a surprise to some people, but I wasn't really alive back then, so it's a little bit difficult for me to grasp the cultural context at which Brave New World was released. It's a little hard to understand what this novel was like relative to its peers, to its contemporaries. But through the magic of the internet, I have discovered that at the time, the utopian sci-fi genre was very popular. A genre where apparently society was like super cool because of technology and like, I don't know, modern problems didn't exist, whatever modern problems were 90 years ago. Yeah, Aldous Huxley looked at all that and said, but what if it was terrible instead? He released this novel to subvert that genre, which was apparently popular at the time. Don't lynch me. I don't actually know. I wasn't alive. My parents weren't even alive. So how exactly does the dystopia in Brave New World take shape? Well, everyone in this world is split into this rigid hierarchical caste system pretty much from the moment they're conceived. That's right, even before they are born. In fact, everything about their lives is determined before they are born. They are predestined for certain jobs, essentially auctioned off to the highest bidder as embryos. And once they are predestined, they are conditioned from that very moment to perform that job optimally and happily. Those who are unlucky enough to belong to a lower caste, destined to do lower caste jobs, have their development, both physical and mental, handicapped as fetuses from the very moment of conception, basically. And they're not even really individuals because they are born in huge identical batches that are essentially treated like worker bees, as identical worker bees, because that's the most efficient way to do low caste jobs, is just get a whole bunch of drones, but human drones. Upper castes are allowed a little bit more individuality, at least in a practical sense, because they are not one in a sea of clones. But regardless of what class you're born into, everyone is conditioned to believe the same set of fundamental ideals from the very moment they're born. So what you end up with is a society that isn't controlled through fear or through terror, but one that is kept placated through sensory overload and hedonism. Now, for the first 2/3 of this book, my feelings on it were kind of complicated, and the best way I can explain them is through comparing subjectivity and objectivity. See, objectively, I knew that what I was reading was quality, and I knew that at the time it was probably mind-blowing. But subjectively, I was interested, but not necessarily in love. I wasn't emotionally impacted. I wasn't, I didn't have my thoughts deeply provoked at the time. I was reading it kind of from an academic point of view. Like, everyone knows Mozart is a genius, and if you listen to Mozart, I'm sure you can say, well, this guy definitely knew what he was doing, but not everyone likes listening to Mozart. You wouldn't expect people to throw on some Mozart in the whip when they're driving to their 9 to 5. So I guess you could say I was interested mostly because I wanted to understand its place in the history of the genre of dystopian novels, of science fiction, and of literature in general. But I gotta say, the final act of this book brought things together so masterfully. I don't think that I've ever done such a strong 180, at least in terms of emotional response, from the 2/3-ish point to the end. The climax of this book is incredibly thought-provoking. I don't want to go into detail about the actual events of the story of this book in the first act or the third act, because they're kind of inconsequential. It's not really about one story. It's about showing you the world at large and communicating certain ideas to you and making you question things through the themes that it's presenting. One of the biggest themes that is presented is the relationship between happiness, beauty, and truth. Is it possible for us to attain all of these things? Can we be happy, recognize beauty, and pursue truth all at the same time? What is our end goal as a species and as individuals? Do we want happiness at the end of the day? Do we want truth? Do we want understanding? These are questions that I'm sure a lot of people don't necessarily think about, because we all kind of take for granted that, yeah, everyone just wants to be happy. That's all we want at the end of the day. But this book twists that in this heinous way and makes you question if that really is such a noble goal. The book also has quite a bit to say about religion. I'm not entirely sure what all of the things it has to say are, because I'm not that bright, but it does have a lot to say. Like, what role does religion play in a world where everyone is happy, where everyone is satisfied, where no one is really left wanting for anything? Is religion necessary? Is religion superfluous? What does it mean in that world? Read the book and you'll find out. Actually, you won't find out, but you'll think about it. Now, I mentioned earlier that predestination is a big part of the story of this world, and it's something that we all kind of accept as wrong as it is presented here. I mean, these kids, babies, fetuses even, are being controlled, every aspect of their life being laid out for them with no say in the matter. They are being shaped with no consent whatsoever. And yet, even though we all accept that as wrong as it's presented in this book, in the real world, our ideas of parenthood, in some ways, are not so different. I mean, it's not like parents are doing what they do in this book, but we all recognize the importance of teaching your kids certain things, of drilling certain ideas and certain beliefs into their heads from when they are young, even if those beliefs are something we view as benign, like empathy, caring for others, treating people how you wish to be treated. These are all good things, and yet we are essentially conditioning our children and accepting that. And while reading this book, it's natural to question where exactly the line is between good conditioning and bad conditioning. What is the difference between the two? And at what point do we go from this is normal, or even this is good parenting, to this is bad? I feel like I'm just listing themes that I noticed at this point, but I'm gonna keep doing it. Fuck it. Progress. What does it mean? Is the progress of society defined by how much happiness it is able to bring to its constituents? Or is it truth? Is progress defined by how close we get to the truth of the universe, our place in it, scientific laws, whatever? Which of the two is it? And what is it okay to sacrifice in the name of progress? Now, I don't know where I stand on that exactly, and you might not either, but this book will make you think about it. More than anything else though, this book examines power structures. It shows how those in power can essentially weaponize distractions and contentment itself to keep a population unquestioning and placated. There is no way you can read this book and not come away reflecting on your own ideas, your own perspectives, your own sense of individuality and how much you actually had to do with it, your own consumption, the ease with which you get distracted, the things you get distracted with and from. You will think about all of that after reading this book. Probably. I do want to make it clear though, while this book is not necessarily portraying hedonism and the endless pursuit of worldly pleasure as a great thing, it's not portraying it in the best of lights, it's not necessarily advocating for a strict return to traditionalism or an outright rejection of self-satisfaction. It's not trying to make everyone feel guilty for wanting to enjoy themselves ever. In fact, there is a character who is outright stating that the confines of this society and the attempts to keep everyone placated and happy is actually holding them back artistically from truly expressing themselves and truly finding contentment. Of course, this is still a 90-year-old book, and a lot has changed since then. I mean, we didn't even have the World Cup, let alone the internet or video games or any number of other modern things that we are all familiar with now. So some things are, just by the nature of the progression of time, not going to age well. For instance, I think this book's takes on sexuality are a little bit outdated. See, everyone in this world is disgusted by the ideas of monogamy, of family, and even of teenagers being celibate. Ew. Teenagers not having sex? Ew. Obviously, this is a dystopian setting, so seeing how disgusted they are by it, you would think that the book is trying to convey the opposite idea. That teenagers should be celibate, I guess? Or that sexuality among teenagers is not something that should be embraced? I mean, that specific aspect of the story does feel a little bit dated, maybe a little bit prudish. I mean, at the end of the day, teenagers are hormonal as fuck, right? Like, we all know that. They're gonna do their thing, and there ain't nothing unnatural about it. Given the overall tone of the book, I don't think it's trying to portray sexuality as a black and white thing. I just feel like the execution is a little bit dated, and there could have been more explicit nuance if there was a modern take on this story. If it was written today, I think that aspect of it would have had more explicit nuance for sure. But in general, the truth, when it comes to most things that this book is asking us to question, the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's not advocating for the extremes that are actually presented in the book. Those are obviously bad, but it's not a blanket statement that the opposite of all of these things is the right way to do things either. It is thought-provoking though on where exactly the line is. There is one more thing that is pretty antiquated in this book. The hierarchy of this world is sort of dependent on the idea that labor must be performed by actual people. So you have all these lower caste people who are essentially bred in the dozens, and they're all completely identical in every conceivable way. They're all mentally handicapped and conditioned to enjoy their job as if it's like the greatest and most fulfilling thing in the world, and then they go out and they do menial labor. Obviously, given our modern understanding of technology, with automation and AI being what they are and continuously progressing, this is a slightly outdated take on hierarchy. In a modern interpretation of this story, if there ever was one, which I'm not saying would be a good thing, but if there was one, automation and AI would definitely be front and center and hugely affect the makeup of the hierarchy and the way in which society controls people. But in this one, it's not really there. Humans are essentially clones. All things considered though, this book has aged remarkably well, and there are some things that he predicted or depicted that are kind of on the nose even 90 years later. One thing that jumped out to me was the way in which he predicted children being indoctrinated into this cycle of consumerism. They are not taught to play simple games that require minimal equipment, because if they did that, they wouldn't be buying things as often, duh. Instead, they play with these elaborate apparatuses that require monetary investments, significant monetary investments, and probably consistent monetary investments over an extended period of time, because they don't last that long, or they have all manners of upgrades that you could and probably would be pressured into getting. It seems to me like it's kind of biting commentary on the video game industry, written at a time where nobody knew what the hell a video game was. I mean, granted, the predatory aspects of gaming are less to do with hardware and consistently enforcing hardware upgrades. Actually, I'd probably say the video game industry is getting better at not requiring hardware upgrades. Like, new game consoles are putting a bigger emphasis on backwards compatibility, for example. But from a software perspective, games are so predatory now, and they are targeting young kids, getting them into this cycle of addictive gamblings through loot boxes and microtransactions. And even though it takes a slightly different shape from what Aldous Huxley is presenting here, the idea behind it is surprisingly relevant. Another thing that he predicted that I did not notice but saw online later on was he actually predicted the negative effects of alcohol on fetuses before it was officially deemed harmful. Now, I'm sure that from our point of view, this doesn't exactly seem like a huge jump to make, like no shit, something that kills our livers is bad for fetuses, duh. But still, it is pretty impressive. So in conclusion, this novel is a fantastic cautionary tale. It takes the idea of a utopia and it twists it. It takes all of these things that we view as good and just, like happiness. I mean, it's the most basic good thing you could possibly imagine. We all just want to be happy. But Aldous Huxley says, are you sure about that? At what cost? And even if you aren't exactly entertained by it all the way through, I think that this is a novel everyone should read and that everyone will take something away from. This is a classic for a very good reason, and now that I've read it, people can't come on this channel and be like, oh, look at this loser. He only reads stupid pulpy science fiction and fantasy and stuff. Read some real literature. Well, now I have read some real literature. How do you feel about that, huh? I am just joking around for the most part, unless of course you unironically do feel that way, in which case, screw you, I wasn't joking. Anyways, that's about all I've got for you today. Hope you're having a good one. I'm gonna go have an existential crisis and ponder the nature of happiness or something. I don't know.